Morning, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. We are going to be focusing on teacher burnout and workplace wellness, mental health in the workplace. I am going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Today, some learning objectives that we'll be covering relate to defining teacher burnout, some statistics related to that, consequences, causes, signs and symptoms, and prevention. And then we'll also spend quite a bit of time focusing on how to look after your well-being and mental health in the workplace and how to manage that. There's a lot of content and information, so it might seem like we are flying through that, but you will all have access to the presentation slides, so feel free to refer back to those at any time, or my contact information will also be listed, and you're welcome to reach out to me with any future questions or comments as we'll be going through a lot of information this morning. Psychology Today describes and defines burnout as a state of chronic stress that leads to physical and emotional exhaustion, cynicism, detachment, and feelings of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. Does that resonate with any teachers out there in the last couple of years? I'm assuming so. Probably all of us with our hands in the air, myself included. Yeah, I see a hand. Teachers are typically people who are drawn to the educational field are typically high achievers in the first place. They like to work hard, are always looking for ways to have that growth mindset going and improve. Very commendable traits, but it also means that you're very susceptible and vulnerable to burnout because along with those traits, we are sometimes perfectionists that don't take the time to rest and relax. When we think about teacher burnout, we know that teachers are confronted with significant challenges, have to adapt curriculum to a wide style of learning. We think about standardized testing, expectations, the public scrutiny that has occurred in the last several years, the pandemic for the last few years and how we've managed that, teaching strikes going on in our own state that have been nationally publicized. So prior to all of those things, teaching was a high burnout field, now incredibly compounded. Many teachers who experience burnout just hit their limits. The day-to-day grind gets to be too much. It occurs after a prolonged period. It's a chronic state. And it's when we're really struggling just to manage emotionally and the interpersonal stuff that we might have going on along with our job stress. Statistically, and pay attention, this part is pre-pandemic, pre-everything else that's going on in our world. At that time, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that more than 270,000 teachers leave the profession each year, starting in 2016, and it's projected that that will continue up to 2026. Okay, let's throw in the mass exodus that has happened since the spring of 2020 that we don't currently have aggregated or analyzed data on, that hopefully will be coming out soon, but I am certain it will be much higher than this. And the BLS attributes that some of the departures might be just to retirement, attrition, even about half of them. And they're looking at this from kindergarten, special education. There might be some occupational transfers. However, considering all the preparation that goes into becoming a teacher in the first place, it doesn't necessarily it's really disheartening that a lot of our friends who went to school to be educators and got licensed are now selling insurance, just because education is really, really hard and can be a thankless profession a lot of the time. So 90% of the demand for teachers coming from exiting unrelated to retirement is burnout. So we want to work really hard on how we can keep teachers teaching and in the classroom. Some other information that we have from the government as far as analyzing those numbers tells us that burnout and turnover are 50% higher in Title I schools, 70% greater for those who teach math and science in a Title I school, and 80% higher for anyone who's alternatively certified in a Title I school. So we know that that is a very demanding setting. Thinking about the consequences of teacher burnout, which I'm guess a lot of you who are with us today know what those consequences are, and this might hit close to home. Variety of responses, and the World Health Organization had described burnout as an occupational phenomenon characterized by 3 main attributes. The first one is exhaustion. When teachers become burnt out, they feel completely depleted of energy, and just like you can't go on with your work sometimes. Cynicism. Anybody see that sometimes in the mirror? I think most of us do. Teachers reach a state of burnout where they feel completely mentally detached, desensitized from their work, their jobs, their students. And that can become obviously very negative and toxic. Inefficacy. So when teachers are feeling burnout, a lot of the time it relates to feeling completely incompetent or ineffective. I think a lot about things like standardized testing when teachers are working through a global pandemic, mental health trauma, social emotional learning skills deficits, civil unrest, World War III, whatever else we have going on. And then we do the MCAs and our results come back and they're nowhere near where we hoped they'd be. That is a feeling that's really hard on people as far as competency. And it's can be really defeating as well. Some additional consequences. Obviously, when we are exhausted and detached, we are providing a lower quality of education, and that's obviously not intentional, but it is a result. We're seeing a lot of emergency teaching licenses being granted because of the recruitment and retrainment shortage and the exodus going on. Turnover rates are 70% higher for teachers in schools that serve the largest concentrations of students of color. So again, I think about equity, and I think about closing those achievement gaps and how much more challenging that is even made when our turnout working with students of color is 70% higher. The disservice that is not only to our educators, but of course to students and their families and communities as well. The causes of burnout. I might as well mute myself, unmute you all, and just let you take over for this part. And I think you could probably educate me more than I'll educate you, and we could have a support group going on. Because I think these definitely are, again, some of that self-awareness that we know. Causes of burnout, a lack of autonomy, when teachers are unable to make their own decisions about what or how they're teaching, maybe what curriculum or supplements they're using. Behavior, we know, again, mentioning those social skill deficits, they're really high right now. There's a lot of trauma. Kids have been very impacted by a lot of things that have been happening in the last couple of years, as well as things going on at the home or historical trauma that they've already been experiencing. Teachers often report feeling a lack of support from administration and that the environment is just too frenzied, too rushed. Prep, lunch, what the heck is that? Because I don't start working until, I might not get paid until 8, but I'm here at 7 every morning. My salary ends at 4 o'clock, but I'm here till 5:30. And then at night, again, I'm doing a bunch of paperwork, grading, correcting, emailing from home, checking emails, getting caught up on things, prepping. Teachers just don't feel like they have a minute to slow down and breathe a lot of the time. Um, Sometimes relationships with families and caretakers can be strained, which can also lead to some causes of burnout. Budget. I started off in the field as a county social worker, and that's where my education initially is. You spend your time in social work hearing about how underpaid and undervalued you are. And then I transitioned to school social work and went on a teaching pay scale and went, holy cow, I was rich as a social worker. This is really sad. What profession out there exists where you have to work 5 extra hours a day to get your paycheck, to use money from your paycheck to buy things to help your students learn in the classroom or to send home with them? There aren't many fields where that happens the way it does in education. Lack of time, again, loss of prep time. We are so short staffed. We might be subbing anytime that we are not with our own kids, or doing double duty, or taking in students from other rooms to make sure that they're learning and being supervised. So there just isn't time to plan lessons, which we know when we haven't been able to invest and plan, we're a lot less confident in our teaching abilities as well. So a lot of mental trauma, secondary trauma, when we are working closely with students who have experienced abuse and neglect, we are affected by that profoundly as well. High emotional demands. Besides the teacher, we are the mom, the dad, the parent, the caretaker, the foster parent, the counselor, the therapist, the psychiatrist, the nurse, and sometimes the attorney and the food shelf as well. So the demands that we have are very, very high. Funding. We know how underfunded the field is in primarily public education. As far as being prepared, things happen when you are a teacher that you never expected to hear, see, touch, smell, feel, all kinds of things. So we're not necessarily always prepared for that. And the situations that we teach in are challenging overall. Some signs and symptoms of burnout. So this is a time to be making those mental notes and checking things off as we go. No longer caring about student discipline and classroom management. Something we're good teachers, we've always cared about, but we are in fight, flight, or freeze survival mode, no different than someone who's experienced a trauma. So things that we used to have time and energy to address, we simply might not be able to anymore when it comes to behavior. We might lower the bar for not only ourselves, but also our students as far as expectations. Planning and preparing for lessons, again, there's likely not much time in the day to be able to do that. We might develop an increasingly negative attitude towards our job, our coworkers, our administrators, the school, education as a whole, or students. When people experience burnout, they can become really mistrusting, which means that we maybe no longer vent or confide or collaborate with colleagues as we once used to, because we don't want to seem weak or be criticized or perceived as incompetent. And the other thing related to turnover, we may have lost a lot of great coworkers that we once had great relationships with and could visit and get some feedback with, that simply aren't there anymore because they're at State Farm Insurance selling home, auto, and life policies. Becoming bored with the job can happen too. People can be understimulated when we desensitize to a lot of that emotional stuff and we're just kind of going through the motions. This one should hit home with about everybody. If it doesn't, I want to know your secret. Lack of physical or emotional energy. When you climb in bed tonight and you're already tired for tomorrow before it's even happened. And then not necessarily being able to understand what students are going through or their situations. feeling anxious about going to work. I provide therapy and support groups for a lot of educators, that anxiety is one of the main things that we focus on. Feeling really anxious about our jobs, about our duties, about how we're perceived by the public or colleagues, administrators, consistently feeling overwhelmed. You have 8 hours a day realistically to accomplish 18 to 20 hours a day worth of work sitting on your desk. You're never going to feel caught up. You could stay there for 2 straight days and still have more to do. So it's just very unrealistic. And then we doubt ourselves, desensitize, withdraw. We start to lose some of that optimism or that sense, things that used to inspire us, we might not have that connection to anymore. Some prevention for teacher burnout. $40,000 annual salary increase across the board. I would advocate for that one. Don't know if it'll happen, but we might all feel better, right? Yeah. We might feel more appreciated. Yep. If I were in charge, that's how it would be. That's probably why no one lets me be. Autonomy, giving teachers more autonomy can improve their job satisfaction, and then we see a higher retention rate. So in the UK, some research that was done found very strong links between teachers who are allowed more discretion, more freedom and independence in what they're doing using their own creative styles. We're more likely to stay in the profession longer. Now, of course, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be rules and that we could do whatever we want. Absolutely not. We need to be held accountable, and there need to be standards and things like that with licensure, but there could still be an increase in addition to that, a compromise with some creative freedom allowed that helps people really feel more satisfied in their positions. And that could definitely be a balance. Engaging teachers in the right conversations. All we do is talk all morning before school and all night after school, but are we talking about the right things? Are we asking teachers, what does good work look like from your perspective, in your opinion? What obstacles are you encountering on the daily basis to achieving what you deem good work? What's needed for that? And an actual plan of action, not just beating the dead horse and talking it to death and going around the room and stating the obvious. We're really good at that too, I have to say. A plan of action. How are we going to reduce those barriers and remove those obstacles? Building teachers' coping skills can also be very preventative in nature. So helping the leadership, helping teachers manage stress with support and guidance. Hopefully then we can avoid some of that emotional drain. Helping modify responses to challenges. Nobody goes into the teaching profession because they're hopeless and disconnected and don't like kids and don't want to work with families. People enter this field and select it as a major full of hopes and dreams, probably picturing that one or two or more teachers they loved that inspired them and made learning fun, and they want to make a difference in kids' lives. That's where we all start out. So how do we teach the right coping mechanisms so that we don't lose that? Workshops, counseling, training sessions that are meaningful. When we plan professional development and we plunk it on the calendar a year ahead of time, are we spending a lot of time and thoughtfulness in what type of training we're going to offer? Maybe surveying staff, what are they looking for? Or paying very close attention, doing some, small scale basic needs assessments. What are my staff struggling with right now? To make sure that we're not just plunking a speaker down to get a CEU, but that we're really being mindful and intentional in what we're promoting with that. And then when it comes to addressing the symptoms, burnout does not happen overnight. It is a slippery slope. It starts off with signs and symptoms, and it kind of snowballs downhill and just gets messier and more complicated. So immediately noticing when there are signs of burnout and having responsive policies in place. If the leadership do notice that someone is struggling, to have that intervention in place as quickly as possible so that we can work with them. Openly communicate, checking in on an individual one-to-one basis. We talk about giving students choices and how that can greatly reduce problem behavior. Giving teachers some choices too, letting them have a voice in some decisions, and staying vigilant can be very helpful. And as far as administrators and leaders, we can help by celebrating staff accomplishments. I know a lot of great principals, directors, superintendents who are awesome at this, at those monthly staff meetings. The very first line item on every agenda is giving employee shout outs, and we are recognizing staff for doing exemplary, awesome things. In addition to that, we as educators can give ourselves and our colleagues a pat on the back. Doesn't have to be something monumental or huge that they did. It could just be, wow, thanks for stepping in and helping out with recess duty today so I could grab a quick lunch. You have no idea how much I appreciate that. Just making sure, because we do appreciate each other, but it's such a mad rush and we're so busy, we don't always take the 30 seconds to express or articulate that. So making sure we're doing that. Lightening the load. I don't have the answer to that. Again, magic wand, wish I did. What duties are on people's plates that we do just because we've always done that don't necessarily need to be there anymore or can be shifted or readjusted? How can we move things around so that the load isn't overwhelming? Team building activities and a positive environment are very helpful. And again, making sure that that professional development that is available to our staff has a meaning and a purpose. And it isn't just a webinar to sit through a webinar during a PLC and get a certificate, but that it's something practical and that we can apply to our jobs. Taking a little bit of self-responsibility here, and how do we help ourselves and take that initiative? Learning to say no, and we'll talk about that a little bit further down in managing our mental health at work. I'm not telling everyone to go back and be insubordinate and refuse to do any of your duties. No one will get to come to my trainings again, not saying that, but learning to be assertive and say no. There are times when our best yes is no, because if we take on that additional task, it is a huge disservice to the education we're already providing for our students. And in order to take something new on, there might be a lot of suffering and struggling with our other duties. So we really need to stop and think about that and prioritize. Leaving school at school. Ugh, that is the worst and so hard. And I know how late you all send out emails and work, because I get teacher emails at like 10 o'clock every night that I wake up to. So setting that boundary after 7 p.m., that's it. I'm not checking or responding to any more emails tonight. I'm turning it off. Exercise. I know this one can be a drag too. Not saying you have to run the mile or be in a 5K, but getting up and moving around whenever you can throughout the day, even if it's just taking a walk down the hallway or around the building when you can. That can really reduce the hormones and chemicals in our brains that create anxiety and depression and help us just feel really refreshed. Taking a trip, if you have the opportunity, go for it. Change the places and the faces for a little bit. It's amazing the shift in mindset and what that can look like when you return to work. Sleeping and resting, also very important. Hard to do when you're in bed all night, laying awake, worrying about other people's kids that are your students, but how finding a way to turn that off and relax and get some rest and do things you enjoy. We are going to move into looking after our well-being at work. So honestly, we are in control of our well-being and mental health at work. We're not in control of all the factors and situations and other people's attitude and behavior, but we can control some of our own destiny with that if we learn how to cope with challenges and difficulties. Um, we're definitely very resilient, but we have to work on that and be intentional. So a reminder that no matter what position or what your title is, whether you're brand new or you're old school, you can develop the mental toughness and the resources to manage the pressure and minimize stress. One thing that can be really helpful, again, I know how late you teachers work, setting a firm cutoff time, but actually sticking to it, holding yourself accountable. Some people can find it really helpful if they make an appointment or plans for 4:30 in the afternoon, because it gets you out of there. It's so easy to say all day, I'm leaving at 4 o'clock today, no matter what happens, I'm out of here. I just need to do that for myself. But if we don't have somewhere we absolutely have to be, it's really tempting and we become really susceptible to sitting at our desk and still working and it's 5:30. If you have somewhere that you have to be and someone else is counting on you, like you're going to go for a walk with a friend or have an appointment, you're more likely to leave because you need to. Stopping before you actually stop work. So each day, 5 to 10 minutes before the cutoff time that you've set for yourself, stopping any tasks at that time and going through an end of day work ritual. So that can be tidying up your workspace, putting things away that are clutter and anxiety provoking that you don't need, writing out a list for tomorrow, decompressing, just taking a look at what is going to happen tomorrow and what your plans are, and spending that last piece of your workday not focusing on prepping or responding to an email or chiseling away at an IEP, but that is your end of day ritual each and every night before you leave. Then getting some closure, emptying your head. So if there is something that you are worried about that you know you're going to go home and be preoccupied and fixated on, take a piece of paper, write it out, and then literally put it away, taking it out of here onto paper and onto the shelf instead of tomorrow can be very symbolic. Positively debriefing. So this would be similar to like a gratitude journal if anyone uses those. But each day, writing down a few positive things that happen. They do not have to be monumental. It could be, I actually got to go to the bathroom 2 times today when I really needed to, instead of holding my teacher bladder all day, or this kid made huge progress, or helped another student, or gave me a compliment. Not huge things, but positive things. And when we write them out with a date, it's inspiring when we look back through the days and weeks and realize how many good things are actually happening. If we just do this mentally, really easy to lose track of and forget. So taking even 60 seconds to put that on paper is helpful. Disconnecting, again, very tricky, but if you actually do get a lunch break, be off your computer, off your phone, off your tablet, putting the technology away. Even though it's hard and your teenager might have texted you 17 times that morning, or you want to check Facebook, putting it away at least for the majority of your break so that you can focus on not having the screen in front of you, because that is linked to a lot of anxiety. And the proper lunch break, taking at least 20 minutes away from your desk a few times a week. Start very small. If you can only do that once a week for a few minutes, start there wherever you're able to and keep building on it. And being really intentional, knowing this is something that benefits your students and yourself. When you're able to take that break, you are in a much better place for them. And taking the holiday, yeah, again, when we talk about having to use our own paychecks to buy things to do our jobs, teaching is also probably one of the only professions that it's so much work to be gone that we just don't use our time off, getting the sub things ready, lining everything up, making sure that the secretary remembers that little Johnny gets picked up early every Thursday to go to a therapy appointment, and that you have to remind this mom of this and that parent of that. It's so much work that a lot of times people just don't take their personal leave, or even if it's for a medical appointment, they push it out until the summer months. But taking those breaks that you earn and are entitled to, we have that PTO for a reason. It's a benefit that we're working for and earning. So making sure that we are taking it when we can. I know the staff and sub shortage makes it even more difficult to do, but when you are able to do that, that you do that for yourself. Avoiding feeling guilty. Taking a break is not wrong. Sometimes we get a chip on our shoulder and might think, if we say we really need our break or a lunch break, it can make us look weak to our colleagues who never do it. But not feeling guilty and just knowing that what you know your brain and your body tell you you need, it's a strength to be able to listen to that intuition and take advantage of it. Prioritizing and planning. So we have about 50 things we know we need to get done every day. We don't always put those out on paper. They stay right up here and just swirl and swirl and swirl. That is very anxiety provoking as well when we try to keep track of that all in our brain. And that's when you wake up wide awake out of a dead sleep at 2 a.m. and go, oh shoot, tomorrow I need to blah, 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 or I forgot to get this parent permission slip out. Those things happen to us as educators frequently, or you're sitting down eating supper and, oh crap, I forgot to respond to that email. I need to do it right now before I forget. Taking all those things out of our heads, putting them down on paper in order of importance, and when the deadline is, reduces anxiety, because again, we have a step-to-step plan then for completing them instead of letting them dominate our mind. Being realistic with goals and expectations. Some mornings I wake up and I am so motivated. I think I'm going to get X, Y, and Z done by 10 a.m. today, even though realistically that's an 18-hour project. No, what can you honestly, realistically accomplish in a day? Think about that. Include how many interruptions you know you're going to face with emails, phone calls, and student situations. Whatever you can realistically achieve in an hour or a day. We think about when we set targets and goals and learning objectives for students, that they need to be achievable, attainable, observable, measurable. The same for ourselves. Talking ourselves into believing that we're going to get 2 weeks worth of work done in 3 days is not likely. So what could I actually do? If we don't ever make the mark or achieve those targets, just like a student would feel, it's really self-defeating and makes us give up and burn out. So what am I actually going to get done? Being flexible. I don't think we even need to talk about this after the past couple of years. Am I going to work today or am I teaching from home? Is it with a mask or is it without? I think we've all become pretty adaptable lately, but no matter how much we plan, things are going to come up that we didn't anticipate for that day, or we didn't have time in the schedule for a student crisis, and now they planned one and did it anyway without our consent. It's gonna happen. So just accepting that I have plans, but they might not turn out the way that I am envisioning. Taking breaks, again, even if it's for 5 minutes and you get up, even if you don't need a drink or to go to the bathroom, get up and do it anyway. If you have a pair or another staff in your room that can supervise, just to get those good, positive feeling producing chemicals in our brains going again. It is amazing when you're feeling absolutely frustrated or irritated or overwhelmed in the classroom, how just walking down the hall for a couple of minutes, how much different you feel when you come back. And if you've never tried it, I suggest that you do. It's just like taking a couple minute break to really be refreshed. Spending time reflecting at the end of the day. And I said reflecting, not beating yourself up over everything that didn't go exactly the way that you hoped it would with unrealistic expectations. Just reflecting what went well, what didn't. How could I do that differently tomorrow? Now, saying no, this is where we revisit this part. Learning the skill of being assertive within our limits when it's necessary and when it's appropriate. Doesn't mean that you automatically say no to everything that's asked of you. Other duties as assigned are in all of our contracts. I guarantee it. It's part of what we do, and we're typically okay with that. But when something is just not possible at an appropriate or high quality, that we learn how to say no to that. Doesn't mean you're not a good teacher, that you're not a good job. In fact, it means you're such a good teacher that you know something else really important is going to have to go to the wayside and you're not cool with that. And we're really advocating for students at that point. So one of the key resources in managing our workplace stress is being able to say no, speaking up. We're setting a boundary. And so we can start that process by being really clear of what's being asked of us. If an administrator or a leader tells us that they are now assigning us with X, Y, or Z, making sure that we're asking a lot of questions and not in a challenging adversarial way, but in an information seeking way so that we fully understand what those expectations are and what it entails. And then letting them know, I need some time to really think about this. Being very clear and honest. If you know that you simply cannot do what's being asked of you at the level it should be performed, that you're very direct. There's probably 100 reasons why we shouldn't, but we don't need to get into all of those details because then it really looks like we're coming up with a laundry list, and that can be maybe frustrating for a leader. Could be better received when we just give one reason. We're not blaming anyone or anyone else, just simply when I consider the other tasks that I have and what the needs are of my students right now, I'm very flattered that you have the faith in me that I could do this. Unfortunately, I just cannot give it the time and attention that it would deserve right now. Whatever response it is that you receive, that you listen. So I don't know, not everybody has this character defect, but for me, sometimes when the response isn't what I'm hoping for, I'm physically hearing it, but I don't know how much I'm paying attention because I'm so busy already thinking of my argument or justification or response that I'm more focused on that than truly hearing what someone else has to say. So being intentional, just listening without formulating the response and paying close attention to that and then responding. It's okay to negotiate and compromise with the other person when they're asking you something. Teachers are good negotiators, are we not? So brainstorming other plans. What else? I know that this task that you would like to assign me is absolutely necessary and we need someone to take this on in our district. How can we do this? Is there something else you can take off my plate and reassign so that I have the time and ability to do this? Is this something that we could split up between the three of us, but that you're having those conversations and that you set up a timeline and stick to it that's manageable? Not, I'm going to get this done tomorrow if it's not imminent and not realistic, but that you have some time to get some plans in place for that. And lastly, we're going to focus on managing our mental health while in the workplace. So if you've already been diagnosed with a mental health disorder or experiencing symptoms, By the way, pre-COVID-19, at least 25% of the adult population met diagnostic criterion for a generalized anxiety disorder and or a mood disorder or depression. So obviously that has increased since that time. We know the stress and burnout on educators has been huge. So it's obviously higher than 25% now, even though we don't necessarily have data yet. When it comes out, I don't think it will have decreased by any means. So if you are diagnosed with a mental health disorder, knowing how to manage and cope is incredibly important with that. Thinking about how we can keep ourselves well. Being a proactive planner is really important so that we are taking care of our mental health needs prior to it escalating to burnout or to a crisis. So if we know what our ill mental health has looked like in the past, coming up with a provider with our administrator about what we can do to avoid that happening in the future. A lot of that then is maintenance, that we're identifying a plan for how we're going to stay well. And then lastly, if you have encountered a serious crisis and are recovering from that, or if you know there's a potential for a crisis, that we're mitigating those risks and going through what we need to do when it does begin to escalate. Some proactive planning to break that down. Being aware, what is a trigger for my depression or my anxiety or my addiction? What sets me off? What makes me more vulnerable to use or to not be able to get out of bed? What sets me off on a decline, and how can I avoid that? Being very aware and alerted to the warning signs or circumstances that lead to problems. Maybe we know that if I run into so-and-so out in the community, that is a trigger. Or if I am exposed to certain kind of media, if something very specific happens at work, it might be a trigger. And then journaling and documenting those setting events that happen so that we make sure that we're aware. So if I know that if I am involved in a restrictive procedure or working with a client who is suicidal, that my mental health would deteriorate very quickly, that I am keeping close track of that and working with my administration to come up with a plan to avoid those situations whenever possible so that I can continue doing my best work as an educator. Maintenance, that is that support from our employer. So we know, thinking about the Equality Act of 2010, thinking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, if a person is diagnosed with a disability, reasonable adjustments legally must be made to the work environment so that they can continue to work safely. Also applies to our mental health. If you have a clinical diagnosis from a qualified provider for a mental health disorder, you need to support and advocate for yourself to stay well. So whatever is relaxing and calming and part of your self-care plan, if it's activity, breathing well, watching funny movies, being creative, art, taking time away, traveling, support groups, whatever it is, that we are making sure we engage in that. And when we think about risk management and crisis planning, having a mental health recovery plan in place that our administrator also is a part of, is aware of, if we ever have had a crisis, can be really critical to assisting us throughout our recovery. So if you've maybe had a significant relapse, that you were hospitalized or went to detox or treatment, or were suicidal, or really struggling maybe with some mania and some depression, that we have a recovery plan in place to help us stay safe and continue working and avoid that. That plan will include what the warning signs are, what we're going to do if there are triggers happening, or if we feel like we are susceptible to crisis again, and that we are working hard to avoid those situations. So the recovery plan should include whatever medical recommendations we have received from a licensed provider that we worked with during that crisis, or that we're currently working with to protect us from a crisis. Support reasonable adjustments. So if your reasonable adjustment might be an agreement in writing and as part of the plan from your administrator that if there is a restrictive procedure at this time, I will not be involved in that. I will stay in the classroom and other staff will be handling that situation. Or that at the present time, I will not be given any additional duties unless other duties are diminished in order for me to be able to juggle and manage that. EAP services. The majority of us have access to a lot of them that we just don't take advantage of. That's a benefit. The benefit and salary package, we sometimes are paid half as much as in benefits as we are in our actual fiscal salary. So using those, a lot of the EAPs, for example, will allow three, therapy can be very expensive. So a lot of our EAPs might allow for up to 3 free therapy or counseling services per incident or per event. So if I'm getting divorced, myself as well as my family members each could get a minimum of 3 sessions. And then if my mom passes away, that's another 3 free sessions for myself and all dependents that are covered. So really taking advantage of using those services that we earn. And then making sure that the plan is going to work for you and your employer, whether that looks like phasing back into work following a crisis or gradually working up to full duty so that we're not completely overwhelmed at one time. Managing a crisis. For example, if you experience a panic attack, and I know there are many types of crises that we might experience in the workplace related to mental health. So I just want to highlight panic attacks and panic disorder as the numbers of people with anxiety disorders are increasing in the past few years. If you are someone who does experience a panic attack, that you recognize that you're having it if you are suddenly overwhelmed with intense fear, trouble breathing, sweating, shaking, chest pain, headache, that you focus on your breathing, take very slow, deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, holding those for a count of 4, keeping your eyes closed during that period because we are hypersensitive to overstimulation and sensory overload when we are having a panic attack. So making sure that we're turning off as much of that stimuli as we possibly can. Grounding ourselves, physically feeling something. If you're sitting in a chair and you're digging your feet into the ground, if you step outside and can just feel the fresh air or the wind on your place, some positive self-talk is really helpful. A lot of times that can just be orienting ourselves to where we are and who we are. I'm Rachel and I'm at school and I'm going to be just fine. I'm having a panic attack. I will breathe through this, or whatever it is that we're telling ourselves. And then being kind to ourselves following. Huge adrenaline rush when people experience a panic attack, which means you are absolutely exhausted physically as well as overwhelmed emotionally afterwards. So making sure that you are really allowing yourself that recovery time. We are to our last slide with my contact information. I know that that was a ton of information. I would like to we have about 9 minutes left. I would like to open up for discussion. If anyone is interested or willing, I know it's a big group, but definitely want to give you the opportunity to have a voice. So I guess one thing I would like to ask is, what do you see when we think about teacher burnout, with either your personal experience or what you are seeing in your workplace setting or in the field, what do you deem or feel is the number one cause of that teacher burnout at the present time?
As people are looking at this, if you wish to comment or put in a thing, absolutely fine. If you would like for the recording to be stopped so that your comment is not recorded, just let me know and I will pause the recording.
I think what I've noticed, I've been in the classroom for 30 years, but I think it's always been a problem, but it's worse now, is just the workload. The workload really has to be reduced, you know, when teachers are going into school and really not getting any breaks. And even the small breaks we have, we're losing, you know, when teachers are out. But I mean, there just has to be a reduction, I think, in the number of hours we're with kids compared to the school day. That's my observation for 30 years in the business. I think that would help enormously.
I'd just like to comment that as a teacher who started in 1980 and retired and is now doing ABE, you really have to stay away from negative people. Surround yourself with happy people. And if you sit in the teacher's lounge for half an hour, I don't know how you manage to make it through the rest of the day with the negative Nellies. And you have to stay away from them and find something funny every day. Every day I went on Board Panda on the computer and found something to laugh at. But the kids are amazing. So they always make your day great. But I agree with the overloading. I don't know why Bob Marzano, they kept Bob Marzano during the pandemic. Again and again, they had to do more work and more observations and more. Why didn't Bob Marzano just go away for 2 years? He's the, you know, classroom observation thing. I don't understand why the administrators couldn't figure that out. That's all I have to say.
Notes in the chat about having too many tasks to accomplish in much too little time, which absolutely was brought up. Feeling underappreciated and like we're replaceable. And then right along with that, the decrease in support from the public. It's easy when the public can take shots at a particular profession. And right now we're kind of in the crosshairs because of some of the policies that were.
Great responses, and thank you to everyone that was willing to type in the chat or share. Absolutely, you are really hitting the nail on the head with all of this. Definitely leads to burnout. When I think about managing your mental health in the workplace and as a teacher and an educator, does anyone have any additional thoughts on that or something that you would like to share related to that overall workplace wellness and managing the well-being? Okay, so go ahead.
We did have one come in on the chat that I think is a nice one to highlight, that it's worth noting that the majority of teachers really love our job. Like, you know, we're not doing this for the fame and money, obviously. We love our job. So it's unfortunate that, you know, we're going through the struggles that we're going through right now. And I think right along with that is just, yeah, remaining positive, trying to stay away from some of those negative feeds into our system. Those are from the chat.
Absolutely wonderful points and so true. People become teachers because they want to teach, and they stay in the profession because they love students. They love education, whether it's adult students or minor children or vulnerable adults or whoever we're working with. we do it because we want to do it and we enjoy it. It's really sad to see so many teachers, and I wasn't kidding. I've got a lot of teaching friends who are working for insurance agencies or working from home, selling things or managing things. And it really is sad because it's not because they don't like students or don't like teaching. It's just so many other things with the profession. So when we think about where we are at now with people leaving the profession, does anyone have any thoughts on where do you see that 5 or 10 years from now if something doesn't change, or what needs to change to mitigate the trajectory of where this is going?
Well, I thought through the idea of when I first got into teaching in the early 90s and then starting through, there was all this discussion of the basically all jobs, but teaching jobs were going to explode because we had so many teachers that were trained in the 50s and 60s. As part of that, we got to, get our science up to be ahead of the Russians in the space race and all that stuff. And all those people are going to be hitting retirement age. Well, that wave in general has mostly passed now. So it seems like there should be less attrition because the Gen Xers like myself, we're not quite into that retirement age yet. So it'd be slowing down, but it's not. And that's just an interesting thing that we're still accelerating at a point where we should be slowing down.
Absolutely great point, Andy.
Okay, does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Some more things coming in on the chat.
I'm just going to comment that as an ABE teacher that was a classroom teacher for 40 years and then failed retirement and came out of retirement to teach ABE, I get so many compliments from my adult learners, and they're so positive, and it is just there are some real advantages to ABE, and I think you have mostly ABE people here, and they're, compared to working with 7th graders, there's just a dramatic difference in the appreciation and the work ethic of the adults. And that is one of the huge pluses for ABE, in my opinion. I'm done.
Yep. So everyone, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.